Hello, everyone, and welcome to our podcast, Poetic Intercessions. I'm Katie.
I'm Jiveta.
And I'm Ain. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, so today's discussion will be exploring two poems that is at first seems very different, but actually share some fascinating connection. Telephone Conversation by Wol Soyinka and The Return of Si Tenggang, also known as Si Tenggang's Homecoming by Muhammad Haji Saleh.
These poems allow us to explore the intersection between two important themes from our course, which is
Mm,
poetry of colonialism and multiculturalism, and also
mhm,
poetry of exile and post-colonial identity.
mm-mm. Yeah.
What's particularly interesting is that both poems deal with identity, but they approach it from completely different directions. Like
Mm,
in telephone conversation, identity is
mhm,
upon the speaker through racial prejudice,
mhm,
whereas E Tengang's homecoming, identity is something the speaker
mm,
actively for himself after years of travel and cultural experience.
Mhm.
Yep, that is true. And for our discussion, we have chosen option B from the project guidelines, which is the tone and persona shift, or what is also called as empathy swap, right?
Yes, right. Okay, so
Mm,
instead of analyzing each poem separately, we're going to imagine what happens when the speaker from one poem is placed
mhm.
into the world of the other poem. How does
Yep.
Soyinka's witty, hyper-aware speaker handle the traditional constraints of Tenggang's village? And
Yep.
conversely, how does a self-assured cosmopolitan Tenggang react to the rigid bigotry of a London lady?
Whoosh.
By doing that, I think we hope to understand how personal history shapes the people,
Mm-hmm.
the experience with migration, belonging, and
Mm,
identity. I
mhm.
think our main argument today is that both poems are ultimately concerned with one question:
Mm,
who has
yes.
Mm,
defined identity? Is identity
mhm.
determined by society, or can individuals
Mm.
define themselves? That's a question we'll keep returning to throughout our discussion today.
Okay, so now let's begin our discussion with Telephone Conversation by Wo Soyinka. If you guys notice, on the surface, the poem seems simple, which is an African man calls a landlady to ask about renting a room. Everything seems normal until he reveals that he is African. Immediately,
What?
the conversation, yeah, I
Oh
mean,
my
l- yeah, that's the thing. And immediately, the conversation just changed right away.
Yes,
god.
yes, yes. I mean,
Mhm,
throughout the poem, when we read it, the landlady
mhm.
suddenly becomes concerned about his skin color. I mean, like
Push, push,
any
push.
other landlady, rather than discussing
Mhm,
rent, location,
mm,
or qualifications, or whether or not he actually have money, for example, she asks whether
mm,
he is light skinned or dark skinned. So
mm.
this reveals how race becomes the deciding factor in her judgment.
That's so
Yeah,
sad, you know.
actually insane.
Yes.
What I find powerful is that Soyinka doesn't present racism through a dramatic confrontation. Instead,
Mm,
he presents it through something ordinary. It's just a phone
mhm,
call. He thinks that phone call uh,
mm,
and witness how prejudice can infiltrate everyday life, And
mm.
I feel Peter is reduced to a racial category before the landlady even meets him.
Yes, true,
Mm,
true.
yeah, true. I mean, like, one poetic feature that also stands out is the use of the dialogue. The poem unfolds almost entirely through conversation, which is for me lah. This gave it a dramatic quality, almost like we are listening to a scene in a play, right?
Right, right. I agree with you,
Hmm.
Katie, because it does
Hmm.
feels like we're listening to a scene in a play. Like, the
Hmm.
dialogue in the
Hmm.
poem makes us, the reader, feel like an observer listening to the exchange in real time. And we
Mm.
Hmm.
can even feel the awkwardness and discomfort as
Hmm.
the telephone conversation develops. what's
Yeah.
brilliant here is how Soyinka formats the lady's voice. Like in the
Yeah.
poem, Soyinka uses capital letters for her questions like how dark. Like everything, every alphabet is in capital letters. So here, Soyinka tries to emphasizes the clinical, demanding nature of her microaggressions. Contrasting heavily with the speaker's rich internal intellectual monologue.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. And because the racism is revealed through speech rather than explanation, I feel like it
Mm.
feels much more authentic, you know. The landlady
Mm-hmm.
expressed her own prejudice through her words. And Soinka
Mm.
doesn't need to tell us she's racist because her questions reveal it for us already, you know.
Yeah. True. True. I mean, like, the another feature that I notice on this poem is irony, which is the speaker responds to the landlady question with humor and sarcasm.
Yeah.
I mean, instead of simply answering, he begins to describing different shades of his body. Oh my god.
Yeah. I mean, the moment is actually quite funny for
Yeah,
me, but it's also feel kind of uncomfortable because the humor draws
true.
attention to how absurd the lady's obsession with skin color really is. When he brings up
Mm-hmm.
terms like brunette, peroxide blonde, he is
Mm.
throwing the vocabulary of European aesthetics right back at her. So this is
Oh
in a
my
way like
god.
he is essentially mocking the entire
Mm.
structure of colonial classification.
Exactly.
Mm.
Observe the terms that he brought up, you know, like brunette.
Yeah, true.
Mm.
The I feel like the speaker weaponizes humor rather than becoming racist. He exposed the ridiculous logic behind racial classification. Yeah, by
Oh.
treating questions as absurd, he highlights how absurd racism itself is.
Mm. Yeah, true. I mean, like something else that I also noticed is the pacing of the poem. The conversation somehow feels fragmented. I mean, in that poem, there's what interruption, pauses, and sudden shift. Right.
Right. True, true. I mean, the discussion in the poem never flows naturally, like it
True.
keeps being disrupted by the issue of phrase. And here,
Yeah.
Soyinka uses like what we have learned in class, like caesuras and sudden line breaks. And so these
Mm.
line breaks are somehow making the line breaks like fragmented, cutting off
Mm.
phrases mid sentence. Like in the poem, when we read it, we can see
Mm.
like one of the line in the poem, the black porter,
Mm.
the slash cigarette smoke. So
Mm.
this particular line feels like the telephone wire itself, being choking under the weight of her prejudice, stalling the natural
Mm.
rhythm of human connection.
Mm.
Yeah,
True. Yeah.
uh, very true. You know, the discussion did not flow
Mm.
naturally, and I think that
Yeah.
caption reflects the speaker's social reality. Like his
Mm.
ordinary is interrupted by prejudice. Even a
Mm.
simple task like finding accommodation becomes very complicated because of racial assumptions, you know. So I feel like the broken rhythm of the poem here mirrors that
Mm.
experience.
I mean, like the structure itself also contributes to the meaning. Don't you think so?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, in a way,
Mm.
like which shows that form and content are working together seamlessly and becomes a site of resistance.
Yeah. Wait, I have a question on that.
Yes.
Beyond
Yeah, sure.
racism, what do you guys think that what is the poem is really saying? Like legitly.
Well, for me, Katie, that's actually a good
Mm.
question. For me, it's about dehumanization and the reclaiming
Mm.
of agency. So in the
Mm,
poem,
Mm.
for me, the speaker is treated less like a person and more like an
Mm.
object
yeah.
Mm.
that needs to be classified,
Oh.
right? By his
Yeah.
phrase. But by the end of the poem, when he asks,
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't you rather see for yourself? He
Mm.
completely change or flips the power dynamic. He forces her
Oh.
to confront his physical reality, refusing
Mm-hmm.
to let her hide behind the anonymity of a telephone line, right, Javeta?
Mm. Mm.
I like
True.
I would like to push that idea further. The poem isn't just like
Oh,
criticizing one racist landlady. It's
oh.
critiquing how do I say? It's critiquing a colonial mindset that reduces human beings to categorize. This
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
frustration comes from realizing that society often sees race before it sees humanity. And
Mm,
that
yeah.
poem like so powerful even today.
Yeah.
I try.
True about that.
Yeah, that's a very deep analyze Jibeta.
Mm,
So
mm,
we're going to move to our second poem, which is Si Tengang's Homecoming. So
mm,
Si Tengang's Homecoming by the legendary
mm,
Muhammad Haji Saleh. This
mm.
poem
Yeah.
reimagines the traditional Malay legend, as we all know, Si Tanggang, the famous
Mm-hmm.
one. So in
Mm-hmm.
the original folklore, Si Tanggang, as we all know, leaves home and then
Yeah.
he becomes wealthy and
We'll see. Yeah.
successful
Yeah.
as a captain of a ship. But when
Mm-hmm.
he returns, he rejects his mother and
Mm,
his roots because
Mm.
out of shame. So
Yeah.
because of this, it resulting in him being cursed by his own mother, and as we all know, he turned into stone.
Mm-hmm. True. But Muhammad isn't like Muhammad Haji Saleh challenged that interpretation. I mean, like
Yeah, yeah.
instead of portraying Si Tenggang as ungrateful or something like that, he's just present him as someone who has grown through travel and experience. Is it?
Yes, yes.
yeah,
Mm.
what makes poem like so interesting? The
Yeah.
speaker
True.
idea that leaving home automatically means abandoning one's root. Instead, like I feel
Mm.
like this traveling through different countries and
Mm-hmm.
learning different languages has
Mm.
and his identity. So
Mm.
if you ask me, I would say rather than losing himself, right? I feel like he
Mm.
has found himself.
Mm. True.
Yes, I agree with Jivita that rather than losing himself, he has expanded himself, right? Because one feature that stands out immediately is the reflective persona. I
Yeah.
mean, Muhammad Hadi Saleh, uses like a reflection of this speaker, and unlike the speaker in telephone conversation, when
Mm.
we read it, we feel intense. It
Yeah.
feels like immediate interaction. But
Mm-hmm.
here in Si Tenggang's Homecoming, the speaker is calm,
Yeah.
introspective, and he is even highly articulate. Like the
Yeah.
way he addressed his village, but
Mm.
he's also speaking to a collective or like cultural anxiety about westernization and also, as we all
Mm.
know, alienation, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, like, I also want to add that the tone
Mm.
also in this poem much more confident. I mean, he's just not defending himself, but
Yes, I
he
agree.
also explaining himself, right?
Mm.
Exactly. I feel like there is a sense of like self assurance throughout the poem. Like the speaker has
Mm.
all accepted
Mm.
who he has become, and
Mm.
he's
True.
he's like simply stating his truth.
Yeah, agree with that. And also, like, the structure feels different from telephone conversation. I mean, in this poem, it flows smoothly and naturally. Right.
Yes, right. That's exactly what I realized about this poem, right? Because this
Yeah.
poem, there aren't any like structural interruptions and sharp
Mm.
tensions, like we saw in Soyinka's poem. Here
Yeah.
the pacing feels much more relaxed, although it is as we read it, it is structurally organized into six stanzas, but because it
Mm.
uses some kind of a free verse, it
Mm.
somehow mimics the steady rolling movement of the ocean waves. As we
Mm.
read throughout the poem, how it carried him away and then brought him back
Mm.
to his hometown.
Mm.
So here,
Yeah.
for me personally, it sort of signifies an open, unconfined identity of a person for me.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah. True.
that's the speaker's internal state. Like unlike Soyinka's speaker, who is
Mm.
like for defensive position, si Tenggang
Mm-hmm.
conservative. Like he
Mm. Yeah.
decides story it told. The flowing
Mm.
structure mirrors his confidence in his identity lah.
Yeah, true, true. I mean, like, what the imagery of journeys, language, and travel is also important, right? In this poem.
Right, right. For me, because here Mama Haji Saleh uses this imagery of journeys, languages, and travel to show growth rather than loss. Like in the poem, he talks about learning one of the line, broadened by land and languages. So
Yeah.
here showing that how acquiring a new language, for example, he is a Malay, so he acquires English, isn't an act of cultural betrayal. But it's actually a tool for broadening one's horizon when they acquire new language. So it doesn't mean that he forgot his origins, right? But he just, has just contextualized them within much larger world.
From my point of view, I feel like that's a deeply post-colonial message. The poem challenges the idea that cultural purity should be preserved at all costs. It suggests that identity can evolve through contact with other cultures as well.
Yes, true.
I mean, at first glance, this poem seems very different. I mean, like one focuses on racism and what the other one focuses on travel and return. Right.
Yes, yes, you're right. I mean, that's the beauty of poetry, like how both are fundamentally concerned with the politics of mapping one's identity, but both speakers are trying to define who they are against the rigid societal framework.
Yeah, like the difference is where the pressure comes from. In telephone conversation, identity is imposed from the outside.
Mm,
In
true.
homecoming, identity is claimed from within. So
Mm,
if one speaker fights stereotypes, the other
mm,
challenges patience, and
mm-hmm.
then our empathy swap becomes really, I think.
Yeah. Now, we are moving into the core of our discussion, the empathy swap. Instead of analyzing the poem separately, we are going
Mhm.
to imagine what happened if the speakers switch places. I mean, what if Si Tenggang himself became the speaker in telephone conversation? Or what if Soinka's speaker became the narrator of Si Tenggang's homecoming? I mean, do you guys can imagine the swap itself?
Well, Katie, what's interesting
Mm,
about this activity is
mm,
that we're not just changing characters, but we are changing entire ways of seeing the world. Like
yeah,
how each speakers carries different experiences, values, and also emotional responses, right, Jubeta?
Yeah,
yeah.
and that's why the meaning of each poem like changes dramatically when we swap the personas. The
Mhm.
poems start revealing things that aren't immediately obvious when we read them separately.
Mhm.
Now let's start with the first scenario. Let's just imagine
Mhm.
if si Tenggang making the phone call instead of
Oh,
Soyenka's speaker. Like what
oh.
will change? What the changes? How would
Mm.
his expensive, calm worldview collide with a microaggressive one?
Mm, the first thing that changes is definitely the tone lah.
Yeah,
Mm.
true.
It's like sarcastic and witty. This
Yes.
Mhm.
answer is reflective and philosophical.
Yeah, also the cutting humor would probably disappear as the conversation would feel much more serious. Like
Mm,
Tanggang doesn't perform for an audience as he is a character who internalize the vastness of the world. So he might
Mm.
process the landlady prejudice not as an immediate threat, but as a symptom of a very narrow geographic and mental horizon. I mean, wow, what a positive guy he is.
Yeah.
I actually agree. Like, in the original poem, right, the speaker
Mm,
used irony to expose racism. He
mm,
fights the
true.
bidding making it look like ridiculous. But si Tengang's speaker might respond differently, you know. Instead of like the
Hmm.
offline lady, he
Hmm.
try, he might try to understand why she thinks that way. He has
Mm.
Hmm.
years traveling across cultures
Hmm.
and from different societies. Because of that experience, I think he may view the landlady's prejudice as a product of what they call that, like ignorance rather than like
Hmm. True.
authority, you know.
Yep.
Yes, I agree with you, Jivita. I mean, that's the beauty of when you travel. You know, like as mentioned in the poem, had already broadened his vision, right? So that's the
Yeah.
interesting because the focus of the poem would definitely shift. Instead of
Hmm.
exposing one racist person, I think when we shift it, the poem starts to examine a larger social problem.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. I mean, like, the issue would become historical and systemic rather than just being personal, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if Tenggang is on the line, the poem becomes more ethnographic observation. He would
Mm.
look at the landlady the way an anthropologist look at an uncontacted tribe
Mm.
that is trapped in their own limited custom. I mean, like, we could imagine a new made up line for this swap version of the poem, instead of Soyinka's sarcastic breakdown of skin shades. I think, like, Tanggang make say something like, "Madam, my skin is the color of the holes of the ship that have crossed three oceans, while yours is merely the pale stone of a village that has never looked past its own shore." Lol. I mean, like,
I
it's
agree.
completely, yeah, right. I mean, it completely changed the dynamic from a victim of racism fighting back to a traveler questioning, and also, I mean, annoyed in some cases. I also annoyed with that by the isolated mindset of the colonizer or the other party, right?
Um, exactly. I feel like the poem would like become less satirical
Hmm.
and uh, more reflective. Like rather
Yeah,
than
true.
ridiculous this is, I mean, how ridiculous is this woman's behavior? The poem might
Yeah.
ask, how did society create these attitudes in the first place? And I
Yeah,
think
that's true.
more tragic, you know, because
Mm,
prejudice no longer just one person problem, but it
mm,
has become something embedded in society itself.
yeah,
Yes,
it's
yes, yes.
true. Mm,
That's a good take, Jivita. And you know, let's move to another situation, right? Now let's
yeah.
reverse the situation. What if
Yep.
Soyinka speaker became the director of Sitengang's homecoming? Like what would happen?
Hmm. Wait. I think this changes the poem even more, shifting to much more cynical territory. Right? Do you guys
I
think?
agree. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
I mean, like, the original Sitenggang returns home feeling confident and entirely comfortable with the person he has become. I mean, he expect his growth to be understood, or at least accepted on his own term. Right.
Yeah, yeah, yes. That's why he sees travel as a positive experience, and
Hmm.
like we have mentioned before, it broadens his understanding of the world.
Oh
But
yeah, that's true.
Soyinka speaker carries a different experience. He's a
Oh.
person has already been judged because of race. So if
Hmm.
he went home after traveling, he might not be as optimistic. In fact, he might question whether belonging is ever truly possible.
My God.
I think that's true, Jiveta, because
Hmm.
because Soyinka speaker has been battered by the harsh
Hmm.
realities of the imperial center. He
Yeah.
knows that no matter how articulate you are, no matter what it is, or how many European shades of culture you acquire, the
Mm.
world or society will still try
Hmm.
to categorize you, put you in a box, reject
Hmm.
you.
Yeah.
But Jiveta, you have a very good take here. Can you explain more?
Yeah, Jiveta.
For me, I think the original Sea Tenggang believes that people can grow through cultural exchange, but
Mm-hmm. Oh.
knowing speaker has experienced a society that refuses to see beyond racial categories, you know. So like he might
Oh.
ask the value of growth if people still like judge me based on appearance. His experience
Mm-hmm.
discrimination would make him more skeptical.
I really agree with the part, that you mentioned what is the value of growth if people still judge me based on appearance. So
Hmm.
does this mean that the tone becomes less celebratory?
Yes, I think the tone, like becomes less celebrity because instead of like celebrating multicultural identity, the the poem like might start questioning whether like society genuinely accepts multicultural identities. The speaker may like wonder whether like people truly value diversity or whether they simply tolerate it.
Yeah. Wait. That's actually a much darker double consciousness interpretation. Oh my god, I just realized it.
Yes, I
Um,
agree.
right. I mean, like, it turns a poem about healthy cultural hybridity into a poem about permanent displacement.
Mm-hmm.
The speaker becomes a perpetual outsider, unwelcome in London and alienated in his own homeland. My god.
And that's what like makes the swap so revealing, it shows that
Yeah.
experiences influence how we understand belonging. The
Yeah.
same can like feel empowering to one person
Mm,
and frustrating to another person.
yeah. True.
Yes, yes. You guys, the more we discuss these swaps, the more I feel
Mm,
that both poems are dealing with the exact same fundamental conflict, which is
yeah.
the trauma of misrecognition. Whether
Mm-hmm.
you are looked down upon by an empire, or looked down by your own landlady, or even misunderstood by your own village,
Yeah.
naturally the pain comes from the same thing, which is being misread, right?
Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, like, I was thinking the same thing too. I mean, at first, one poem seems to be about racism and the other about migration. But above all, beneath this surface, both speakers are struggling with how they are perceived, right?
Completely agree. And
I agree.
Yeah.
And I think like this is where the deepest connection like between the poem appears. The real
Mm-hmm.
conflict isn't about race. The real
Yeah.
conflict isn't about migration as well. But the real
Mm.
Mm.
authority over identity. Like who has the
Oh,
who a person is.
right. I mean, like, in telephone conversation, if we remember back, the landlady tries to define the speaker through races, right?
Right. I agree, Katie. I mean, in telephone conversation, yeah, the lady tries to define the speaker's race, and as we all know, in Sitengang's homecoming, the
Mm.
village society tries to define this speaker as an arrogant betrayer who has
Mm-hmm.
completely abandoned his roots, went
Yeah.
overseas, right? So here, in both cases, the external world tries to write the script or tries to pin down a role for that particular individual, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
True.
In both poems, other people are creating identities for the speaker. The
Mm.
speaker the speakers they resist those definition. One uses human irony, the other uses reflection and self affirmation. I
Yeah.
think they are different, but their goals is the same. They both refuse
Mm.
to tell them who they are.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. True. Also, there's another connection that I noticed, that both poems are deeply influenced by colonial history. Even though, I mean, like, both poem, they have their own approach differently.
Well, how so?
Well, in telephone conversation, colonial ideas about race still influence how people see each other. The landlady assumption doesn't come from nowhere. I mean, they are connected to a history that rank people according to race, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. And something similar happens in Steve Tendang's Homecoming.
Mm,
The speaker's identity becomes more complex because He has encountered multiple cultures. He's
Yeah, true.
expects a post-colonial world where people are constantly moving between local and global influence.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And talking about all of this, it reminded me of something that I read before on how post-colonial theories call this third space or hybridity. This means like the
Wow.
landlady represents the
Mm-hmm.
colonial
Mm-hmm.
trying to police or trying to guide its borders.
Yeah.
And while the Malaysian village in Sitenggang Homecoming represents a newly independent nation, suffering from a cultural defense mechanism. So both poem actually
Mm.
fear that the exposure to the outside world will equals to contamination. So
Oh my
both
god.
poems prove that colonial history continued
Mm.
to fracture identity even long
Mm.
after physical empires have collapsed or long after war has
Mm.
ended. That's my
Oh wow.
opinion.
Yeah.
Exactly, actually. One poem shows like its effect through prejudice. One shows its
Mm.
effect cultural hybridity. But
Mm.
both demonstrate that colonial history continues to shape how people understand themselves and others.
Yeah.
Yes,
True.
yes. So
Mm-mm.
I think the root question or like the core questions for today's society is that what's truly fascinating is that
Mm.
these poems are being written way many years before, like decades ago. Yet these
Mm.
poems feel even incredibly urgent, or we can even relate to it nowadays. So that
Yeah,
shows that how these poems is not statistic or historical artifacts, not just a poem kind, but
Mm.
they
Yeah.
are mirrored as to even what happened nowadays in our society, in our world.
Definitely. I mean, even though they were written in different periods, the issue they raise still hasn't disappeared. I mean, it still happens in today's world, right?
Yeah, I
yeah.
know, right?
Mm-hmm.
People today still like face similar struggles. Many real like live between cultures. Many people continue to encounter stereotypes, and many
Mm-hmm.
like balance personal identity with society's expectations.
Yeah.
But
True.
applying these poems to modern society, they
Mm.
challenge to ask an important question. Do we
Mm.
truly allow people to define themselves, or do we still rely on categories to do the thinking for us?
Mm.
That's a big thing, Janetta.
Yeah.
Yeah. True. Okay, guys, as we wrap up today's episode, it's clear that both telephone conversation and the return of Si Tenggang deeply explore identity within post-colonial experience. I mean, while their setting are completely different, still, both poems share the same core concern about belonging, perception, and even selfhood. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Although we have come to our wrap up for today's episode,
Oh.
our close reading highlighted how form dictates
Mm-hmm.
this reality. In telephone
Yeah.
conversation, Soyinka relies on sharp dialogue, irony and fragmented pacing to expose racial prejudice. Yet, on the other hand, Muhammad Haji Saleh uses a much more reflective persona, and he uses journey imagery to present identity as something fluid that grows through cultural encounters, right?
Yeah, true. I mean, like in one speaker that fight back the resistance of satire itself, while the
Yes.
other defends himself through calm reflection. Yet neither speaker allows society to force them
Hmm.
into narrow box, as you say, right? I
Yes,
mean,
I agree.
mhm.
And that was the beauty of our empathy swap challenge. By
Yeah,
switching colors, we prove that tone completely rewrites the poem's meaning. Si
yeah,
Tenggang's perspective turned the London apartment search into a deep meditation on prejudice, while Soyinka's sarcastic persona transformed the Malaysian homecoming into a sharp critique of societal acceptance. I think it
Mm.
proves identity is never formed in isolation. but it's
True.
shaped by history and environment, you know.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, I completely agree with Jivita when you mentioned that um identity is never formed in isolation. You know, it's constantly shaped by history and environment. Like
Hmm.
ultimately, we can conclude that both poets challenge simplistic labels.
True.
These poets try to remind us that human identity cannot be reduced solely to race, nationality, or tradition, or even where you come from.
Yes,
Yeah. Which bring us to the back of our core question, which is who defines identity?
yes,
The Yeah, true, right? I mean, our analysis shows that the constant tug of war between self
Yes,
definition, yeah, and true expectation is a like kind of tension that is incredibly relevant today when we talk about multicultural spaces, right?
yes,
yeah.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
What poems teach us that identity is not fixed or imposed.
Yeah,
It is continuously negotiated. To truly
true.
understand, we must look at the richness of their experiences rather
Mm-hmm.
than own assumptions. You know, I feel like
Mm-hmm.
tend to just have their self assumptions and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, look at their experiences or the lessons encountered in their life.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that brings us to the end of our discussion. Right.
Yay!
Yeah, yay.
It's the end. All right. Thank you so
Yay.
much for listening to us.
We hope this episode like
Yeah.
you a deeper appreciation of how poetry helps us unpack the complex human experience. You know,
Yeah, true.
Yes.
Yes.
thank you so
Okay. Thank you and goodbye guys. See you on the
Goodbye,
next
guys. See
time.
you on the next
Yay.
episode.
Bye
Bye.
bye.